Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program on podcasting. I'm glad to have you here with us. While we are letting everyone in, why don't you go ahead and share in the chat your location, your affiliation, any form of contact that you'd like to share, whether it's your email, LinkedIn profile, or your preferred way of connecting. And we will just give everyone a minute here to join. Looks like we have a decent crowd. Aaron, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started so that we're on time and get to enjoy the panel that we've assembled today. For those of you who don't know the Encore Network, our mission is to champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 and over. We are pretty strong membership now, I think, of 300 plus individuals. And we create community, stimulate learning, and one of our primary ways of interacting is through affinity groups. So you can learn more by going to our website and join us in our mission. So 3 things to start. Please mute yourself. And we want to use the chat for questions and comments. And it's very useful for us if in front of your question you could put the letter Q, the capital letter Q, that helps us identify them. And just so everyone knows, we will be sending the recording in a follow-up email. So if for any reason you have to drop or would like to share this information with others, you can do so. So I'd like to introduce our program today on podcasting with just a few quick statistics. The U.S. podcast listening audience has grown so fast that it's actually doubled from a decade ago. According to statistics, we have reached over 158 million listeners this year alone. And as of October 2025, there are over 605,000 active podcasts, including the 4 we're going to share with you today. And just in case you are wondering, YouTube is the most popular platform for monthly podcast listeners, followed by Spotify and Apple. So now we're going to introduce the panelists. Okay, I thought we were going to start with the, okay, let's start with Deborah. Why don't you introduce yourself and your, oh yes, thank you, Aaron. Perfect. This way you have the order and the name of the podcast. So why don't we go in this order and I'll let you all introduce yourselves.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Deborah Albert. I run a part of the Lean In organization, which was started by Sheryl Sandberg, ex-COO of Facebook. And she started this nonprofit called Lean In, basically to have women support women in all endeavors. I run the New York area. They have a community of about 7,200, mostly women, and mostly in the New York area. And my podcast is Leaning In to the Future of Work.
I'll go next. I'm Andy Levine. Great to have everyone on the webinar here. I host a podcast called Second Act Stories, and I've done about 180 episodes. And all we do on this in 20 to 25 minute segments or so is we profile individuals who made dramatic career changes. My favorite example to share with people is a corporate real estate broker who now hunts pythons in the Florida Everglades. So that's a rather interesting career change. So they're not all quite that dramatic, perhaps, but we try to find people who are really interesting and have interesting stories to tell and share them with you. I think I'll toss it to you, Mark.
Okay, I guess I'm next. My name is Mark Miller. I own the Repurpose Your Career podcast, which is for those of us in the second half of life. Started it in October of 2016 to support the second release of my book, Repurpose Your Career. It went on hiatus in September of 2023 when my wife suffered a major stroke and she passed away just over a year ago. And I'm now going to be rebranding it around not just career transitions, but life transitions. Because I'm going through one big one right now. And I will toss it to Dorian.
Hey, I'm Dorian or Dory Mincer. My podcast is revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com. It started as actually Revolutionize Retirement, my fourth Tuesday interview with expert series, and I'll be talking a little more about that and how it's shifted to podcasts. But it's focusing on issues about retirement, end of life issues, aging, transitioning, you name it, and we talk about it. And I have wonderful experts that I've interviewed over 13 years.
Awesome. Thank you. For those who don't know me, I wear two hats. Here at the Encore Network, I am the co-lead of programming and member engagement. So that's part of why I'm moderating today's panel. And then my other hat is I am the co-founder of 50 Wise, which is a recruiting firm that places and advocates for older experienced workers. Okay, so let's get started with a poll to warm everybody up. So I believe this is going to show up here on the screen. Have you ever considered hosting a podcast? So we'll give everybody a chance to answer, and then we'll show the results, just to warm everybody up here a bit. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, great. So 75% have considered hosting a podcast and 25% have not. Okay, well, I think that means that we'll have some good, engaging content for you here today. And again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We have folks monitoring. So we're going to do some round robin around the panel to try to get some diverse answers for you. And we're going to start with what prompted you to start your podcast? And we'll start with Deborah, and then we'll go to Dory. We'll have the ladies answer this first.
Okay, well, first of all, I think nowadays video is very much a part of podcasting. A lot of times you'll see an interview happening and you'll see someone with their mic in front of their face. Mine has always actually been on video, and I too interview experts. What prompted me is running this community where women are supposed to support other women. We used to do in-person, before COVID, we used to do in-person speaker series. And so we'd get maybe 150 or so people to come into whatever limited space we had and have different kinds of conversations about how to negotiate better, how to take that credit for your idea and not let it get stolen by some guy in the office. A lot of issues surrounding work. When COVID happened, I wanted to still be able to provide value and education to this audience. So I turned it into a monthly series. I've been running it since 2016. And the reason it's called Leaning into the Future of Work is I have an advisory board that suggested that we talk a lot about new technologies. So I would say about half of the content is around sort of lean in ideas, helping women get more out of their predominantly work life, but it isn't just exclusively that. But it's also about new technology. So of course, lately I've been doing a lot on AI and bringing people on who can actually demonstrate it. And the reason that I do it is I'm very curious and I'm not shy. So I don't mind asking the questions, and I don't mind sort of saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Tell me again in English. And that way I learn also. That's why.
Thank you, Deborah. Dory?
So I came at it through wanting to connect people initially, and then it sort of evolved into podcasts. So in 2006, I was one of the quote leading edge boomers. We were all turning 60, and it was like, yikes, what's going on? And so I started a phone connection that turned into interdisciplinary professionals, and we ended up meeting twice a month, and then ended up having books and different things as springboard for discussion. And then over the years, I went to so many conferences, starting in 2007, positive aging conferences, encore conferences, a lot of different conferences, and met some fabulous, fabulous people. And there were more and more books coming out. And it was back when there wasn't a lot of podcasting and interviews going on. So I was sort of ahead of the curve then. Now there are so many. I'm kind of one of many. But I started then in May of 2012, and I'm doing an audio only in contrast to what Deborah said she's doing. It's audio only. I call it my Revolutionize Retirement Interview with Expert series. And I do it on the fourth Tuesday of each month to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. And I touch on all kinds of issues about aging and life and end of life and death and you name it. Really wanting conversations, wanting to connect people, wanting to bring people together around these ideas around how do we age intentionally and consciously. And then in 2012, influenced by my virtual assistant, we decided to celebrate my 10th anniversary of these interviews and decided to kind of repurpose them into podcasts so that they really had a wider audience and could be available to anybody anywhere on the Apple, Spotify, Substack. And there's been a wonderful following, and it's now, to get to the podcast series, it's revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com. And if you click on view all, you get a list of probably about 135. I think Doug actually tallied it for me and said in a promo for this, about 135 podcasts. So I repurpose. And so part of what I'm going to be hoping that you'll think about is there may be things you're doing and you have a network, or there are ideas that you want to get across. And podcasting may end up being a wonderful way of doing it. In my case, it's free. People sign up ahead of time. I have a virtual assistant who helps me, although I have recently learned that it's important to learn the skills yourself because my virtual assistant is sick. And thank goodness, through the contacts with Doug, I have a wonderful person who's you're probably seeing here, who's helping with Encore, who's now helping me with my program. So if you're going to do it, and if you hire somebody, learn how to do it yourself. But anyway, more about that later.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies. Let's turn a little bit to the tech side of this world. And the question I have is, what is the easiest, simplest way to start a podcast? Let's start with Andrew and then Mark.
Sure, and please call me Andy.
Andy, okay.
So I'm going to break this into two parts. The first is sort of how to structure your podcast. And I think you start with sort of, all right, what is your focus? What do you want to define? What is the topic? Second question is, does it have an audience? And the third one is anyone else already doing this topic in a podcast? So I want to sort of illustrate this by talking about two women that we interviewed on our podcast. Their names are Sue Ryan and Nancy Treaster. They were kind of remote friends. They worked in the software industry together, but they both became caregivers for their husbands who were battling dementia. So they started a podcast called The Caregiver's Journey, and it would offer practical advice to other people that were going through this same experience they were having. So were they passionate about this topic? Yes, it was a great topic. They were passionate about it. Did they have an audience? Yes, there are about 50 million people in America right now who are caregivers. many for older parents, many for their spouses. Finally, was anyone else offering this type of a podcast? Surprisingly, the answer was no. And they have been wildly successful, have built this tremendous audience. Each of their episodes, they've done, I think, about 47 episodes so far, so it's fairly new, but each of their episodes are about 25 minutes long, and it just has been a wildly successful experience for them. The second part of this is the technical side, which Maggie talked about. So I'll switch to my own experience here. When I started Second Act Stories, I had my focus. I knew what I wanted to do. There really wasn't a similar podcast out there in terms of how I was going to approach it. But I really didn't understand things from a technical point of view. As my family will tell you, I'm not the most technical person in the world. So what I did is I enrolled in a weekend course at a local university. It was New York University in my case. I live in New Jersey. It was called Intro to Podcasting. It was a 3-day course. I went and was completely immersed in podcasting for 3 days. And I learned how to record, how to edit, how to post, how to market my podcast. I had actually done a sample episode, so I took it to my professor in this case, and he gave me very candid feedback about what was good, what wasn't good. And that is sort of how I got over the technical hurdle, was to find a technical guide. In this case, it came through New York University and really got me on the right track. So that's my story. Mark, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, let me piggyback off that and talk about, firstly, is what kind of format do you want to do? Do you want to interview people? Do you want to do a solo episode? Do you want to have a co-host? Listen to the podcast that you enjoy and what you would enjoy doing. Because there's a lot of podcasts that do what we call pod fade. And pod fade, usually, the average podcast dies after about 7 episodes because people don't enjoy it. So the first thing you got to do is make sure whatever you're doing is fun, right? I agree with what Andy said. Is there a market for it? I was fortunate. I spent most of my career in tech, and I did a lot of online stuff. I've done a lot of voiceovers. So recording audio to me was easy. By the way, whatever you decide to start, don't start out with video. Start with an audio-only podcast. It's a lot easier. 2, one of the things I also want you to understand is your first kind of stuff you're going to produce probably will suck. This is true of all of us. And the idea is, by the way, you can delete it. You will get better. If you go look, I have 367 episodes. My first few episodes, my audio wasn't the greatest. 3, one of the things I want you to get is understand your audience. And by the way, my audience is older. It's over 50. Initially, I really tried to get my audio so it sounded wonderful. Well, you know what? Most of us are over 50. Our hearing isn't as great. Where do people listen to this stuff? In their cars, on the gym, while they're walking the dog, usually while they're doing something else. It took me a while to be so I wasn't so anal about just being nice to myself and making it easier. I recommend that you find someone else doing a podcast or take a course. Find someone to help. I actually had someone, I hired a company to help produce my first episodes, select the music, a lot of that stuff. I think I spent $500. And from a tech perspective, I mean, I record my interviews over Zoom. Yes, the audio's not gorgeous. It's good enough. I have a Samsung 2QU microphone. It's a whole $60. It plugs into my MacBook Air. I edit my audio using Audacity, which is free. it's not expensive. But the key piece to start out with is, what do you want? What's going to be fun? For me, my podcast was the greatest networking tool I ever had. I've interviewed more New York Times best-selling authors because I had a podcast. I had a guy who I interviewed who had the art of excellence, and he had people like Deepak Chopra. He had the CEOs of Stripe and Whole Foods. And as I said, how did you get these people? He says, I just asked. He said, Obama turned me down. Okay.
Wow, very interesting, Mark.
Yep.
Thank you. We do
I
have
just
a
want to pick up on
follow-up.
one thing Mark said, that the barrier to entry for this financially is incredibly low. The equipment you need, less than $500. But you can get on Spotify, YouTube, Apple at zero cost. It's completely free.
Yep.
So it's an amazing medium that is incredibly inexpensive.
Okay, we do have a follow-up question for you, Andy, to probe further on your comment that no one else is doing the same topic, and why you think that's important, or how maybe you can overcome it given the sheer nature and number of podcasts. There will probably be overlap.
It's a good question, and there certainly was overlap in the podcast that I was doing. But what I found was mostly what people were doing is they were interviewing experts about second acts and that sort of thing. They'd interview professors, they'd interview authors, that sort of thing. My different direction was to interview the actual people and also do it in person. So in my former job, I traveled a lot. So whenever I went somewhere, okay, I'm going to be in Kansas City. Who can I interview here who's in a second act? And so I would do it in person. So I was looking for something different. So perhaps I overstepped my bounds a little. If there's someone else already doing what you want to do, that's okay. Just find a different way to do it. Find a different format. Bring some new insight to it. You want to bring your own creativity to it, and that's what I did in the case of Second Act Stories.
Got it. Okay, thanks for clarifying. Okay, we're going to launch our second poll, which is, have you ever been a guest on a podcast? We're just curious to see how the audience stacks up. And then we're going to get to that question, I think, Lynette, that you had. So let's see the poll. Should be coming up. Here we go. Let's see. Because I would imagine, let's see, well, kind of half-half, more no's than yes, but a fair number of yeses. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about that. Love to hear more about the experience actually hosting or being a guest. So what it's like to find guests, to think about the questions, or if you have been a guest, the highs, the lows, the good, bad, and the ugly. And this time we'll start with Dory and we'll go to Andy after.
Okay. So in terms of my interviewing, one of the things I do is if there's a book, I read the book. So it's really keeps me informed, and I find it just so stimulating. And I agree with what others have said. You want to have fun, and you really want to have deep conversations with people. So I find that by doing my own work of interviewing people, I'm talking right now about the hosting, that it's really, for me, it's really helpful to do that. I started way back at the beginning asking people who I admired. And then I began, as I said, being at conferences and, approaching people. And for the most part, people said yes. I have discovered now that there's so many, and there's some podcasts that do pay people, that it doesn't always happen. I also learned early on that I shared with other people I interviewed, thinking there'd be some reciprocity, and it didn't always. Mostly, it didn't happen. That people would sort of want to hold on to the guests they had, at least in some of the networks that I've been part of, and not share. And others are very, very generous. But it's relationship building and networking. I think Mark mentioned about networking that I think so important. And I think over the years, I've just become more visible, even though it's an audio only, but more visible with speaking and being on other people's podcasts, so that I've been invited to be on podcasts. And sometimes I've invited the people back, sometimes not. I do get a lot of people who pitch to me who want to be on the podcast, and I have to keep really clear sort of my own boundaries, that the content that I want, or how much of what content that particular year. So I don't always, have people come who are pitching to me. I've tended not to pitch to other people. What I have found is through networking, podcasters who want to, interview me come to me, which I love, and it's part of that network building. And in general, I say yes, unless the particular podcast just feels like it's just too out of, just isn't something that I feel like I can contribute to. And if I'm going to be a guest on a podcast, I try to listen ahead of time, to the podcast, so I sort of know a little of what the orientation is, make a point of, really being in contact and interacting with people. And sometimes it's just a wonderful reciprocity of then, inviting people back. I always, if I've been on a podcast, once I get the link for the podcast, I put it out on my website, and I'll share it with people so that it ends up giving information and helping people know about other podcasts. So, it becomes kind of a win-win in relation to that. I also, years ago, a friend and colleague told me about, this was way at the beginning, told me about podcasts. It's called Podcast Guests, that I joined. I think I have an automatic payment for it, so I think I'm still on it. So I think probably some people find me through that. But also, as if you get out there and get known, you get contacted to be interviewed, to be on, podcasts and stuff. It's really a relationship building area. And, you need to be kind of clear of your own content. As I've said, mine's mostly kind of 50 and older, sort of like what Mark was saying. Although I sometimes have younger people, and I have people, through 90. Maybe even there's some in their hundreds. I have no idea. Mine is one that I have people sign up ahead of time for the interview that I do once a month. And then it gets repurposed into the podcast. So there's sort of that two-prong kind of thing of what I do. And similar to what Andy was saying, I am not technologically minded. There's a lot I can do, but as I said, I did hire a virtual assistant, and it's been very, very helpful because she helps with the speaker part. She helps with the sign up and the marketing of it. And then people don't have to sign up with the podcast. You just can go to it and listen anytime, anywhere. And so I think those are the main kind of things, the good, bad, and the ugly. So, I've had people at the last minute, cancel. I've had one person who just totally spaced out and forgot. But generally, when people cancel ahead of time, I'm able, to put someone in because I kind of have a waiting list, and I'm kind of scheduling into next year now. Yes, there can be technological kind of issues and problems. I use a platform called Instant Teleseminar. It happens to be the one that the virtual assistant that I've worked with has used. I've never heard of it before, but it sort of seems to work. I know sometimes people complain and they say, oh, I wish you did Zoom. I'm not doing Zoom and video now. It just seems, I think as Mark was saying, it's easier in a sense doing, just the audio. Mostly the podcasts I've been on have been video. I'm actually going to be interviewed for one later this afternoon. So there's just, it's kind of fun and exciting, and it's the the connections and the relationships that you build that I think are wonderful. And it's a great form of networking and being able to be seen over time as a thought leader. And yes, there are a lot of podcasts out there, and they're, a lot doing similar things. But I think that what I find is, because I read the book and I try to, develop my own relationship with the person I'm interviewing. So it may be that some of the same content gets shared, but it seems to work. The other kind of good, bad, and the ugly, there was one podcast I was on where there was problems with their platform, and the recording just didn't work well, and so it just never got aired. And I really, that bothered me a little, because if I've had problems, I try to get back to people and kind of correct it. But you just have to kind of not take things personally, and just, we all have different platforms, we all have different ways of doing it, and the goal is to have fun and to kind of get certain ideas across and learn from other people. There's a real reciprocity in the learning. So I guess that's my 2 cents on it right now.
Thank you, Dory. Andy?
Sure. Just to pick up on one thing Dory said, you mentioned to do research in advance of anyone you interview. I will just, whatever I can learn about that person, I'll do social media searches on them, look at their posts, look at other people who've written articles about them. If they do have things they've written, I will read it. But I go into an interview with as much as I can learn about them in advance, I try to learn it, and it allows me to ask more interesting questions. So I'm going to answer this question here from the highs and the lows. I always like to start out with the lows because we'll end with the highs. The lows for me are interviews that haven't gone well. One I remember, I was doing an interview with a fascinating woman in Chicago. She owned her own public relations agency, and then in her 70s, she became an actress, which is something she had done when she was in high school and college, and she went back to acting and was very successful. Well, I did the whole interview with her microphone unplugged. So when I went to listen to it, you could only hear my questions. You couldn't hear her responses.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually went back and traveled back to Chicago. I had other business there, and I re-interviewed her. She was good enough to do that. Beyond that technical problem, sometimes I'll get a guest who isn't quite as interesting as I thought they were going to be. And it's sort of like, oh God, how am I going to make this an interesting episode? And I have to struggle and I have to work at it. But that's sort of a low as well. When you think you have someone who's got a really interesting story, and then when you actually sit down with them for an hour, it's not quite as interesting as you thought. So the high, and I'm going to focus on one specific example, which I think some of the other speakers may reiterate in other ways, is I've personally always wanted to do a TEDx talk. I always wanted, one of my personal goals, I start each year off with, what do I want to achieve? And this TEDx talk thing was on my list for like 10 years. And after I'd done 100 episodes of Second Act Stories, I thought, I finally have a wealth of knowledge in this special area. And I created a topic called The Art of the Second Act. And I applied to 19 different TEDx committees asking to be a speaker at their TEDx conference. 18 of them said no. But God bless Grand Junction, Colorado. They said yes. And I only got about 2 weeks notice, but they said yes. I don't know if someone canceled or whatever. But anyway, suddenly I was on stage doing a TEDx 2 weeks later. And it's about an 18-minute address that I gave, and over 100,000 people have watched it. And it just introduced me, and it introduced my podcast to a whole wealth, a new audience, a new people, and that sort of thing. Well, I never could have done that without the experience of doing 100 episodes, because basically my talk was, 5 common truths about second acts, and I sort of categorized them together. And, so anyway, it was very, very rewarding to, after interviewing these 100 people, really have a wealth of knowledge that made me an expert in the area of second acts. And it was very rewarding to do the TEDx talk.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that, Andy. Very inspiring. I know, Deborah, you wanted to add something, and then we'd also like to get to Lynette's question of, well, I'll let you start, Deborah, and then we'll pose Lynette's question to the panel.
I agree with what everybody's been saying about the technology side of this. I think what's really important is to just really be yourself and not get too freaked out if something bad happens. Because I think that authenticity, and I hate that word because I always feel like, if you're not authentic, then, and if you haven't been, and all of a sudden you're on the bandwagon of getting authentic and showing your vulnerable side, it's like, well, who have you been for the last X number of years? But the truth is to just relax about it. I once had a pretty well-known guest. Her name is Dory Clark. She's a professor. She's a speaker. She's done tons of TEDx's, and she has 275,000 followers on LinkedIn. And so she's a pro. And for some reason, my internet completely went kaflooey, and I was not able to be seen. I was all glitchy. It went black. Everything bad happened, and nobody could hear me. So I was actually typing into the chat what my question was. And Dory's such a pro at this. She would know to repeat the question and then answer it. And she would say, I think what Deborah's saying is, or what Deborah's asking, you have to have a sense of humor about it. I think that's important.
Love that. Okay, so Lynette's question is, how do you find podcasts that you would like to participate as a guest? So I know you guys have mentioned a little bit about how maybe you were doing it and the networking. Any other tips that we can give Lynette?
Okay, let me chime in here.
Okay.
Number one of the other questions is how are things found? And podcasting is different. People find podcasts not by Googling, but by going into their podcast app. So you have to understand when you go into Spotify or you go into Apple Podcasts, when you do a search, it searches only on the name and the title tag. Your name, the name of the podcast and your name. And you have to very strategically keyword optimize that. And one of the things that you want to do is you want to go ahead and go search those and find podcasts that are relevant, that are like yours. People also find podcasts by you being on podcasts they listen to. Someone was asking the question about, well, those people over 60, we're the smallest demographic listening to podcasts. By the way, I'm 69. So first thing you have to do is find people who actually listen to podcasts. So being on podcasts that people actually listen to, you've solved that problem. So being a guest on other people's podcasts is a great way for your podcast to be found.
And even sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, even if you don't have a podcast and you just want to promote your expertise, let's say, or you've written a book, whatever it might be, I'll just share one simple tip that I learned. There are kind of two ways you can do it. The normal way is to pitch somebody and to say, gee, I've listened to your podcast. I think it's wonderful. I think I could bring some expertise to you and your audience and that sort of thing. And that's basically a pitch. You're pitching yourself and your story. I suggest starting with something even simpler. Just start with a simple email that asks, how can I nominate someone to be a guest on your show? And usually the host will come back to you and say, well, I'm looking for this, and this, and they're sort of honored that someone's interested in them, that sort of thing. But I think if you start with that simple pitch or that simple email of, how can I nominate someone to be a guest on your show? You start a little bit of dialogue with them. You find out what they're looking for. And then you can respond, okay, I think I could be a good guest for your show, and here's what I would offer your audience. Dory, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I would just wanted to add a couple of things. One, I think if you have a book, I mean, it's a way of writing maybe a little article about your book, but write an article about something, and even put it in a local paper. you want to try to establish yourself in whatever the arena is that you do. And I was just also thinking about what Andy said, that, back in 2016, I did a TEDx, and it was just a wonderful experience. And it was on, your bonus years as a time to grow, learn, and evolve. And that led to then me, kind of being invited to a lot of things. So if you recognize that you have some expertise in something, it may take, just like publishing a book, it may take a lot of, rejections, but it is a wonderful way to get known and helps with your confidence and all. So, I just really recommend, well, tied in with what Deborah said, kind of be yourself, try to, develop whatever the arena is that you have. And, write articles, it's a lot of time sometimes, and it takes time to do those kind of things, but it can be very helpful, and it's a lot of fun. So I just wanted to sort of share that part too.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
Can
Go ahead.
I chime in on this?
yes.
One of the things, if you are going to pitch yourself, please don't say, here's who I am, this is what I can give you. No, what can I give your audience? I get all kinds of people. I used to get pitched all the time, and the pitches were horrible because they were, look at me, look at me, look at me, versus what can I do for your audience? And someone likes to hear about interview connections. You can pay to get put on podcasts. My experience initially, this is back in 2017, 2018, wasn't very good. Mostly there weren't that many podcasts that did what Andy and I do. But I ended up having one person who worked for them, who eventually left, who I hired directly. And the big thing was she understood me. She'd seen me speak in Austin. She got me. And that's the hard part of someone pitching you for you. And if they really need to understand your story.
Okay.
And that's hard.
Good points.
Right?
I just want to finish off the question here by Wendy Green. She's asking, how do you get found and what do you think about YouTube as a platform? So, Mark, I know you started that
Yeah.
conversation with some keywords, but let's try to answer her question.
Well, so to be found on podcasts is a lot harder. There's no algorithm. You can put your podcast on YouTube, and there are two ways of doing that. I publish my podcast audio only with a still image. If your podcast is more than 10 minutes long, people tend not to listen to podcasts for more than 10, 15 minutes. Because you have to be, if you do video like Deborah does, people have to be sitting in front of their computer or their iPad or whatever. In most audio podcasts, we listen to them while we're doing something else. We're in the gym, we're in the car. And so what some people do is like I do, is I would publish the podcast to YouTube, hopefully to be found to get them back to my audio podcast. It's strictly discovery. And by the way, it works sometimes, but being found in the podcast world is really different.
Cool.
I'll just add on YouTube. YouTube has been sort of wild for my podcast, Second Act Stories. We similarly will use the audio with, then hopefully we get a series of images, like 8 to 10 images that we can splice in. But we have some episodes on YouTube where we'll get like 17 people listen to it, and then we'll have another episode and like 10,000 people listen to it. And what we've found is if the guest you're interviewing has a large following on YouTube, it totally makes sense. One person we interviewed, we don't interview a lot of celebrities, but Michael Strahan, the broadcaster, is a great example of a second act. He was a top NFL football player, and now he's a top entertainment personality. So when we interviewed him, when we put it up on YouTube, it just, thousands of people listen to it because people are interested in Michael Strahan. So, I think if you were starting in a podcast now, you'd be a fool to ignore YouTube. It has become the big dog. And, for a while it was Apple was the only game in town, and Spotify came in, and Stitcher and others. But YouTube is where the majority of people are listening to podcasts now. And so, YouTube's got to be part of your program.
Deborah?
I actually plan on, because my interviews are an hour, and there's Q&A at the end, and I plan on actually starting my YouTube channel and cutting it all up so that it is in smaller increments, because it's absolutely true. People don't necessarily have the attention span to sit for that long. And I just forgot what I was going to say. You see, you can mess up on these things, and so what?
It's okay. We'll come back to you when you remember. I do see another question in the chat from Luann. Other than the value of networking, can you make money doing podcasts? This is a good question.
Okay, let me chime in on this.
Okay.
I'm a big follower of Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting, and he's written some books on monetization. Basically, the best way to monetize a podcast is to promote your own business. In other words, you're not going to get direct money making unless you're Joe Rogan, right? Now, what has changed with audio podcasts is they're now programmatic ads. I host on Libsyn, and I place 2 ads at the front, which get inserted magically, and I put 2 at the end. And I will, when I restart my podcast later this year, I will put an ad in the middle. I used to put a promotion for my own business in the middle, and right now I haven't published an episode in 2 years. And I'm still making $30 to $40 a month on programmatic ads. That has all changed in the last 2-3 years. Where will this be in the future? I don't know. But the first thing you should focus on is building your audience. Produce good content. Produce something that people want to listen to. One of the things I would do, I have 337 episodes, is I would go look at the download stats, and I would find certain guests generated more downloads. Why? The topic was interesting. I would also survey my audience every year. I would run a survey. What do you want to hear? What is of interest? Know thy audience. So first, before thinking about monetization, is produce good quality content that people want to listen to. It's build your audience.
I'll piggyback on that. I really do agree. The audience is important. Part of what keeps me going is I have this wonderful community. And then knowing that with the podcast, once I do the interviews with the podcast, it can be open to anybody, anywhere kind of thing. And I also agree that YouTube is good. Similar to Deborah, because it starts as an interview in my case, mine are kind of an hour long. And what people have told me is that often they'll listen to part and then they come back to it. So I haven't gone through the whole thing of chopping it up and all. I mean, maybe that is another way to do it. But the other thing is that when the podcasts are released, I do a promo on like Facebook and LinkedIn. so that, people have the information to lead them to want to come and listen to it. And I found that, to be pretty helpful. I mean, I often get emails back from people thanking me, oh, gee, I'm so happy to hear about such and such. So those kind of things can be helpful too. And I do agree with, I mean, the audience is important. And I also, similar to what Deborah was saying, I integrate Q&A from people. And so that's part of the podcast too. So people know it was from a live situation, and then it's, and it's not, and similar to what, we know on here, when there's so many people, you have to mute everybody, and it has to be, questions either asked on the internet or chat or whatever platform you use, because it can create technological drama and damage to have all kinds of noises in the background. So that, I mean, I'm on the phone and the person I interview is on the phone, and usually my assistant's on the phone to troubleshoot. But everybody else is muted when I do it. And so people are hearing in my podcast something that was initially live, like I think is Deborah's situation.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, you remembered?
No, but I'll make a different comment. Just in terms of helping people understand potentially how to promote your podcast. I have a huge mailing list, and I send 3, sometimes 4 email blasts, 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, 1 week out, day before, usually. I also post on Facebook and LinkedIn my own. And here's a little trick that could be interesting. I belong to a lot of Facebook and LinkedIn groups. And when there's a group that has a similar topic, if you will, like as I said, I'm doing a lot on AI now and having actual demonstrations. And so I'll go to a bunch of AI groups and post also there. And it's pretty easy and pretty quick. And I know there's a lot of AI programs and others that can automate those. I just haven't had the time to look into it yet. So it can be a very easy process.
Maggie, can I just go back to the monetary question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so we did accept advertising on my podcast. There weren't. We found it difficult to attract advertisers. We had a couple of different advertisers for a while, but we also felt it sort of hurt the value of the podcast. It slowed things down. It wasn't great from the listener's perspective, so that didn't work terribly well. We did, I'm forgetting the name of the software now, but there is one where people can contribute to your podcast, and we have that, and occasionally someone will contribute, $5 a quarter or $100 or that sort of thing. So that's been good. The one thing that actually has worked very, very well, and it's very sporadic, I've only done 3 of these, but someone contacted me and said, we'd like you to come and speak before my group. And I said, well, my time's valuable. I'll charge you $1,000 to do that and cover my travel expenses. And they paid $1,000. The next one, I said, my fee is now $2,500. The third one, I got a fee of $5,000 to do. I couldn't believe it. And now it's been very sporadic. But that has been an interesting source of income. $5,000 basically covered my entire costs of the podcast for about a year. And so, someone wrote in here, Patreon. Patreon is the one that I was talking about earlier. But speaking engagements, again, it's been very sporadic. But when I get a request for it, I charge a speaking fee for it, and that has worked well.
Okay. Okay, we have a related question. Does YouTube force advertising slots into your podcast? Does anyone know?
It doesn't in second act stories.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like it does, George. And so thank you for that question. Okay, we have another question from Gerald. I'm going to try to pose it, and if I don't pose it correctly, we'll circle back. But I think the point that Gerald is trying to make is what happens if you don't have a good following or listener group? Because he's saying only 1% get more than 2,500 listeners. So how does that reality impact your podcast?
Okay, let me chime in on this one. Now, there are 4.5 million podcasts, but 90% of those are dead. They've pod faded. The one thing you have to understand about a podcast, it has what we call a very long tail. You know, when you're someone like Andy, and he's produced well over 100 episodes, you will get people who will find your podcast and then they'll start listening. It will take a while to build an audience. When I stopped in 2023, I was getting about 10,000 downloads a month, which put me pretty high up. But that was because I had so much content out there. It makes a big difference. So initially, don't worry about building your audience. It's just be consistent. One of the key things you want to do is figure out how often are you going to publish a new episode. If you say once a month, then do once a month. How much time do you have to dedicate to this? Because people, they will build up a habit of listening to you if they know, oh, if this is a weekly podcast. I used to publish on Mondays. So every Monday, people knew I had a new episode. So figure out, okay, every other week, once a month, when I start relaunch my podcast, I'm gonna start out as a monthly podcast. Then I'll move to bi-weekly and see where I want to take it. But don't say I'm going to do bi-weekly and then not being able to do that, because you will lose your audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We have an interesting question. Has anyone experimented with TikTok?
Short answer, no.
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 I'll take that. I haven't done it yet, but I'm co-founding a startup also, and we're all about helping the 50 plus market, et cetera. And so I actually have a campaign in mind, which is directed to, let's say, the children of 50 and 60 plusers. And to me, it seems like TikTok is a great place to talk about that. So I'll keep you posted.
By the way, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, great suggestion. Okay, Jackie, I see that you are trying to pose a question to Eric Elmendorf. What is your podcast about, and approximately how many participate at your senior center? Eric, are you able to answer? I know you weren't one of the panelists. Okay, he might just be.
Maggie, I can speak for Eric. I work with Eric.
Okay.
He's kind of indisposed. He's running back and forth from the screen. He's
Okay.
kind of in an emergency situation, so I'm sure if he gets back in time, he'll answer.
Okay, so we'll give him a moment to get back to the screen. In the meantime, let's go on to our next question. What do older adults uniquely bring to podcasting? And we'll start with Mark and go to Deborah.
I think it really comes down to experience, life experience. And then how does that relate to your audience? One of the things I found, I've been a professional speaker trainer for most of my life. One of the things I found was I sucked as an interviewer, but I'm a really good conversationalist. One of the things I found, which for many of us we're used to talking to people. So one of the things I found was a lot of the people I interviewed had never been interviewed before. So one of the things I would do is say, we're just going to have a conversation. I'm going to tell you the first question I'm going to ask, and then we're just going to have a conversation. And most of us who've reached this point in life, we know how to do that. It's not a skill I need to acquire. Now, I usually would know the kind of the stream of consciousness I wanted to follow in the interview. If it was an author, I kind of knew the chapters in the book I wanted them to discuss. And I would tell them, oh, by the way, I'm going to make you sound wonderful. I'm going to make you sound smart. One of the skills I had to learn, I said, I was not a good interviewer because I'd have a list of questions and then I would stop listening because I was always worried about the next question. But if I just said, let's start this conversation, it went off a lot better. And that's something most of us at this point in our lives, we know how to do that. And all I'm trying to do is build a relationship. And by the way, one of the other things I want to mention is I had to learn that I needed to think before I talk. So I've had lots of people tell me, what a wonderful interview you are. And I'm going, no, I'm very good at editing out my verbal vomit. Right? Because I would start talking and I'm thinking and then I stop, restart, and just learning to slow down. My mind runs really fast, but my ability to put out words at the same rate does not work as well.
Deborah, did you want to take a stab at this one?
Sure. First of all, I absolutely agree with what Mark said about having a conversation. So when you're researching your guest, whether it's an author or it's just an expert or whomever, you start to build an awareness of that person. And even if you don't necessarily think up every question at first, that's fine, because somewhere in your quiver, you'll be able to pull something out that you discovered in your research. I prepare usually around 20 questions. I ask the first one, and then I never look at my questions again, because just like Mark, it's absolutely got to be a conversation. And to get more poignant about the actual question that you asked, Maggie, I think that as an older adult, we're better at that. I mean, first of all, if you're doing an interview podcast, and some don't, some just espouse whatever they want to espouse. If you're doing an interview, then you have to listen. And as compared to some of our younger people in the world, they're not nearly as good at listening anymore because of all that has happened technologically, et cetera. So we're good at listening, and that's like half of the battle. And I think we bring a better context and perspective because of our life experience. So that, I think, is something that's very different from, let's say, a 25-year-old who's podcasting. And also, we're not chasing fame. We're not chasing followers. I think it comes from a better place. We're doing it because we really want to educate people, entertain people, or whatever. It's coming more from the heart. And I think that older adults can do that better.
Great.
Yeah, let me chime in one other thing. One is we know ourselves. Like I said at the beginning, this has to be fun. It has to be enjoyable. It's something you want to do. If it's not, you're not going to continue doing it. So knowing what you want to do and you're excited about it. When I relaunch my podcast about life transitions, I'm already thinking about my first 4 episodes will be on all the lessons I've learned over the last 2 years. Right? And there have been a lot. I've been humbled many times. I want to talk about that. I'm excited about talking about that. So I think a lot of it is we have enough life experience to know what, it's about, by the way, it's about me. It's about what gets me excited. And I have to listen to that. I think
I
Dorian.
was going to, yeah,
Lori?
thanks.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add one other thing. I mean, I do think that we have experience and wisdom and perspective and all of that really helps. And I think the listening is really important. I also, though, often, for the most part, ask if there's some questions that the guests would like me to be sure that I ask. I do that too. And because I really want to be sure that it's something, that's going to meet some of their needs too. So I do that. And my experience sometimes has been, as Deborah was saying too, I'll start with a question, and maybe it will be a question that they had. And then organically, it sort of maybe goes in whatever direction. And then I'll try to maybe integrate, another question that was from their list, but sometimes it just goes a different direction. Because that's the beauty of it. It's the conversation, and it's just getting, deep thoughts and ideas and connecting with somebody, and then the listener being able to connect with that. I saw there was a question there about what motivated, the starting of it. And I think for me, it's loving to connect people and I just love ideas, and I love thinking about things, and I like kind of the strategy of connecting people and ideas, and really in the realm of aging, of really helping people think more consciously and intentionally about what's going on. And I've discovered this year, I mean, when I look and sort of do like what Mark was saying, I'll look at maybe who I interviewed over a year period. This year, I've been focusing a lot on joy. I mean, there's so much dark stuff going on. And so I've had two speakers, and actually my one coming up later this month is also about joy, which is just, really trying to focus on how positive psychology and joy and gratitude and, helping us make meaning and sense of the world. And, so I so love that. And I think that's what keeps me going. And even though there's so many podcasts now, but, it's just lovely to be engaged with people thinking about, how to live life as fully and, gracefully and gratefully as we can. So.
Thank you, Dory. Yeah, that question actually is asked of all the panelists. So, Andy, would you like to take a stab at what motivated you?
Yeah, I did a podcast in my business for a while, and I just really enjoyed it. It was so much fun, and it was great. So that podcast sort of came to an end naturally, and I said, "Gosh, I really enjoy this. This is fun." I've always been fascinated by people who have the courage to do something different and try something new. So I thought, let's try this second act idea. And my brother-in-law had been a corporate attorney, and he became a Methodist minister. So I said, let me do like a test run with him and to see how this goes. And so I went and interviewed him at his church. I interviewed a bunch of people who were his parishioners. We recorded one of his sermons, and it just came together really beautifully. And I thought, okay, this is something I can do. So anyway, it's just I enjoy storytelling. I enjoy telling other people's stories, and it's just been very rewarding that way.
Nice. Mark?
Yeah, I released the second edition of my Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life in October of 2017. So in the year before, I started the podcast to support the launch of the book. And one of the ideas is I was going to publish the audio, because I published on Audible. I would publish those as podcast episodes. And I got started, and as Andy said, it was a lot of fun. So after the book came out, I said, do I stop? No, this is too much fun. I was meeting all kinds of cool people. And that's what kept me motivated. And so I had a reason why I got started, but when that reason went away, I didn't want to stop.
Okay, Deborah?
So besides the practical issues, as I mentioned earlier in this panel, of having a large community and wanting to educate them in some way, I guess the real motivation was throughout my life, I'm, as I said, very curious and I'm not shy. And throughout my life, I've had no problem walking up to people and starting conversations, asking them questions. I've literally grabbed people and said, "Can I interview you?" For whatever reason, I've found that people have said to me many times, "I can't believe I just told you that. I never told anybody that." And so I don't know what it is, and it's not a skill, I think, that I've had to learn. It's just my real curiosity. And I guess people feel safe. And I've been fascinated by what people do for a living and how people find their careers. I can give a million examples of people that went to medical school, after 2 years realized they didn't want to be a doctor, went to law school, or people that jump into careers and don't realize what it's really like. Someone I know was studying to be a thoracic surgeon, and after 7 years of surgical residency and all that, realized they couldn't do it because most of those surgeries are like 12 hours long or 8 hours long, and they had an issue with their feet. So I had always wanted to have a talk show about what various careers were really all about and what people did all day from 9 to 10 to 11 to 12, etc. So that was really where I got started because, again, I've just always wanted to interview people.
Great. Okay, we have a fun question in the chat. What's the most fun you've had with a guest on your podcast? Again, it isn't directed to any one person, so does someone want to share a story or an example?
I'll jump in. Very early on when I started the podcast, I interviewed a guy called Art Schnell, and he was a 79-year-old man. He had lost his wife recently. All of his older friends were dying, and as a Christmas gift, his daughter bought him enrolled him in a stand-up comic course. He loved telling jokes, and he's 79 years old. His world is sort of caving in, getting smaller and smaller as his friends are passing away, and she enrolled him in this course. And it opened up an entirely new life for him. And he's a very successful stand-up comic. He plays up and down the East Coast. And he said the main thing that it did for him is it introduced him to a new group of friends. So he hangs out with all these younger comics. They always joke, "Hey, Art, we're going to put you on early. We're not sure how much time you have left." And he was such a wonderful spirit. I also interviewed his daughter as part of this, and she just said he completely changed his life and sort of gave him a new reason for living. So in the different people I've interviewed, there are lots of different stories like that. But when you say most fun, this guy was funny. He told great jokes, and eventually I went to see his act somewhere, and it was great. But he was a fun person to interview.
Any
Let
other?
me add,
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
I've interviewed a lot of authors. And some of the authors, one of the things when I'm done, the last question I always ask the author is, what do you want the reader to do when they put your book down? And you quickly find with career books, some of them are actionable, and some, by the way, the ones that are written by journalists tend to be very unactionable, right? But there's one guy who used to be, his book was Roar. I can't remember his name right now. I said, "So what do you want people to do?" And he said, "Oh, when people put it down, I want them to blow up some part of their life." And I went, "Wow, you Michael Clinton."
Yep.
And that was one of the things where we then took I did some follow-up questions that were really cool. And it's always nice to find, because I'm looking for what, if I have an author, I want them to be actionable. I want people to be able to read them and walk away. I mean, one of my next asks will be Bruce Feiler, who wrote a very good book on life transitions. And I've had him on the podcast before for one of his other books, and I find people like that they're just a lot of fun to be around.
Great. I think I'll add, I think, I mean, it's fun in a different kind of way, but I love it when from the conversation I come up with a question that the person hadn't thought about, or hadn't been asked before. And then it kind of leads, again, the organic kind of thing. I can think of a couple of people who just come to mind. One was Elizabeth Eisel, who I interviewed a number of years ago. She's a fantastic entrepreneur, and she was talking about the impact of kind of what you did when you were about 10 years old, or the impact of your first job. And so I asked her about hers, and she said, nobody's ever asked me that. I always talk about that so it's just sort of fun when something like that happens. Or somebody who I interviewed this year on Joy, Stephen Petro, and some connection was hitting me in terms of something he said, and it just spin off into another little thing, because he said, I hadn't thought about that kind of thing. So that for me is fun, because I love the interviewing and people's stories, and just that spontaneity. I think that can happen for me. That's just heartwarming. It's fun.
I just add, I think it's a huge compliment to the interviewer when someone says, I've never been asked that question before. So
Yeah.
good for you, Dory.
Okay, well, as we wind down, I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to say a final word, give advice. What are your summary that you would like to leave this audience with? And why don't we start with Dory?
Okay. I would say take a risk. I mean, we all have different risk tolerance, but if you like interviewing, if you're curious, and I share that trait, I think, with Deborah too, with all of us, I think, it's a wonderful medium. I mean, yes, there's a lot out there, and hopefully some of what, we've all kind of mentioned can be part of it, but open yourself to the possibility. It's so easy, and I guess this is something that can happen as we get older. It's so easy to say, oh, I can't do that, or I can't learn that, or we're constantly growing and learning and evolving, and that kind of growth mindset, if we all can hold on to that and just know if it's something that you've been thinking about doing, I encourage it. And I think probably any of us who are on the panel, or other people, I think, have listed others. If there are questions that come up, be in touch. But take some risks if it's something that you've really been thinking about doing. And maybe start with being a guest on other people's podcasts, and trying to make that happen, or just try to do an interview and just see what it feels like.
Thank you, Dory. Mark?
Yeah, I reiterate, I like what Dory said, take a risk. This is a very, very low, there's a low barrier to entry. Again, find something that you're going to enjoy and just do it. I put my email out in the chat box. If anybody wants some help, I'm more than happy. I have plenty of time these days. More than happy to help in any way I can. I helped Andy launch his. And, it's always good to have a second, someone who say, here's my idea. What do you think? And by the way, if I think it sucks, I'll tell you. But you need to get out of your own head. Inside your own head is a very dark place, and get out and talk to people. And I said, be more than happy. I am reinventing myself for the 10th, 12th time. So
Great.
it's I'm willing to help.
Thank you, Mark. Deborah?
I don't think I could say it any better than the two already said it. Just do
Okay.
it.
Andy?
Quick shout out to Mark. When I was starting my podcast, I reached out to Mark and I thought, oh, he's kind of in a similar space. I don't know if he's going to help me much. He was so helpful, and he just told me answered every single question, just complete open book, and it was enormously helpful in starting. So thank you for that, Mark. I still think about my initial conversations with you. Dory said it's an incredible medium. I'm going to agree with that. However, 99% of podcasts out there are incredibly boring. I just find they don't capture my attention, and their ego projects. They are not designed for an audience. I'm not kidding about 99%. I think the vast majority are horrible. So if you're going to do something, really think about the audience out there. What is something that people need, people want? Maybe it's been covered by someone else, but you can do it better. I'd also just add, be willing to try a different format. Most of these podcasts today are a Zoom call between two people, and it's an interview format. Usually goes on way too long. To me, some of the most interesting formats are, one that I can think of. It's like a 4-minute podcast every single day, and the guy just profiles an entrepreneur. He just tells the story entirely, but he's a great storyteller, and that's it. Other ones I've seen, they invite 4 guests on and they debate some issue of the day, and it's a great discussion. So don't be honed in by this interviewee interviewer kind of format. Be willing to try something different, because the world needs new formats and new ideas, and try something that maybe someone else hasn't tried. So, and the final thing would be, keep it brief. If you can say it in 3 minutes, say it in 3 minutes. It doesn't have to go on for 30 minutes. Keep it brief, and always be asking the question, is my audience going to be bored by this? Because if you're asking that question, the answer is probably yes. So you got to keep it moving, keep it fast, or else you're going to lose people.
Wonderful. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you for taking the risk to share with us today and try something new here at the Encore Network. Erin, would you mind pulling up the closing slides so we can just let everyone know what else we have cooking here at the Encore Network? We will be sending a follow-up email with a recording and a discount membership, and you can feel free to pass that along. On Wednesday, October 29th, we will be doing a coffee chat with Andrew Stewart and talking about aging together.
Maggie,
yes.
it's Dave Mack. I have one thing very interesting to say the least, but all the discussion made me remember an old saying that said, the reason God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth is so that we listen a lot more than we talk.
Okay.
Use them in that proportion.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then our next major program, which is typically the 3rd Wednesday of every month, is going to be how governments are leading on age-inclusive employment. So please join us for that. It'll be Wednesday, November 19th. And you can see all of our programming on our website. We're just highlighting a few things for you. And then we will be sending a 10% discount if you're not already a member of the Encore Network. We do a lot of great things here. We explore new topics. We meet as affinity groups. We do programming. Would love to have you join us if you're not already a member. And then, as Andy, I believe, mentioned, we, as you know, it does cost money to put on events, and we do not charge for most of our events. But if you do feel inclined to donate or participate in a financial contribution, it would be very much appreciated. So the links and everything are here, and I think maybe Erin can also put it in the chat so you can have that as we continue advancing the slides. Okay, I guess we could just leave that slide. Thank you again for your participation. I found it very engaging. Thank you for all of your questions. And thank you again to all the panelists. It was a really great dialogue.
Thank you,
Thank you for having us. We obviously like to talk.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next program.